Hello, I'm IskatuMesk, and this is going to be my first attempt to cast a CMBW replay. I haven't casted a Brood War game since the preliminary tests for my YouTube casting, which was for Starcraft 2. I did some early practice runs for Starcraft way back in like 2009, early 2010, I believe. Some Team Liquid games, if I recall. I never released those, I don't believe. So let's hop right in here and see what we're going to work with. I'm going to pause when we start the replay and hope that doesn't break it. Replays can be quite fragile in this project. So let's take a look at our players. There's a little bit of a framework I want to set up for this. So we have, on the top, we have Pr0nogo playing as Zerg, and we have Shambler playing as Terran, which is actually unusual. I usually see him playing as Zerg. And on the bottom, we have Beaver playing as Terran, and we have 22222, which is what the fuck? Playing as Protoss. So I do like to set up a little bit of, I do casting a little bit different than Pr0nogo does. And part of the reason why this will be a little bit different is because I'm not intimately familiar with this project. I've played it only a little bit. I only know little bits and pieces of it. I don't know anything about the maps. But I do kind of want to give this a shot because he did say it would be preferable for him if somebody else casted his games. I've played this a little bit, every now and then playing some of the game nights and a few 1v1s with some of the individuals here. And I figure we'll just give this a shot. I wanted to take a little bit look at the map because I have played on this map once or twice, but I'm not intimately familiar with it. Now, CMBW is obviously very, very different from regular Brood War. There's all sorts of kind of tremendous differences with it. And if you're not intimately familiar with the project either, some of those differences can be really quite surprising because of the extent of this project and how it modifies low-level things within Starcraft that nobody else has even attempted to touch before. For example, instead of having finite mineral fields, each mineral field here actually returns a different amount of resources per turn-in. So when we start the game, we're going to want to take a look at each player's workers and see if they are appropriately mining the highest yield ones first. Took me a while to figure that one out because that's a more recent thing. Of course, we have the ridges, the actual Vespene geysers. So I want to just take a little bit of a look at the map. So on the map here, we have 2 corner bases with double ramps. These maps are all explicitly built for the project because the project makes extensive use of changes to the tile sets. So we have various individuals in the community who make maps for the project, and the maps can be quite varied. Some are old and in need of updating, and some are very new and largely untested. Whatever the case is, the maps are very, very different from the standard crop that we used to see back in the days of Savior and Jaedong. These are very, very much non-standard maps with very, very large open areas, very easily tankable in many cases, wide open ramps. The double geysers could be a lot for those unfamiliar to get accustomed to. The resource income actually is less than in regular Starcraft, however. The resource of this project is obviously a tremendous subject, but what we often see with 2 versus 2s is that they tend to be very violent. So I just wanted to take a quick gander and look around on the map. So this map to me seems like it's going to be fairly low economy. The distances are a little larger than you might normally see in a 2 versus 2 within Brood War, but the players here tend to be quite aggressive early on. And Tier 2 takes a lot longer to hit in this than it does in regular StarCraft. So you do tend to see most games resolve within Tier 1. So the game has begun. I'm not too familiar with the playstyles of anybody here except for Shambler, who I've played a number of games up against. And he is very much an early game focused player. He will always tend to be very, very aggressive to the point of even sacrificing economy in the sake of aggression. Many cases, sort of like borderline all in. But I have seen him transition well into mid and late game. So Pr0nogo is sort of, I haven't actually played with him too much. Obviously, as the lead creator for this project, he has an intimate understanding of how everything works. So that puts him at a tremendous advantage over everybody else. But I get the impression that mechanically, skill-wise, everybody's actually sort of close to each other. So that's actually kind of nice to see. Obviously, I will be the weakest player because I have such low experience and I haven't played Brood War, normal Brood War, for decades. And I last played my projects back in like 2009. So most of my energy playing StarCraft was, of course, in StarCraft 2. This project's very, very different. You can't really come into this looking at it from those experiences at all. But everybody here kind of has a sort of a tendency to the things they tend to do. So it's the 2v2s are really interesting. So I haven't really an early probe death is a big one. There's always lots of cheese going on, and I'm in part responsible for some of that by showing people how easy it is to proxy in this. We're actually seeing a fast command center coming out of Beaver with a barracks. That's really greedy. Fast command center. An early rogue gallery coming out of 3-man. I believe that is Keyan, if I'm not mistaken. Whereas actually Shambler is going for an early star pad. We could see some air harass coming out. So of course, all races have access to early tier 1 air in this. And it's not like you have to tech up a tech tree quite extensively to get access to air. You can get air very, very early, and air cheese is exceedingly common both in 1 versus 1, but in 2 versus 2 especially, because one player can protect the other while he performs some kind of very, very aggressive harass. So the Rogue Gallery, judging by this, as I've actually not seen it before, is likely going to be responsible for some cloaking units. So we're going to see the Barghest, which is a cloaked air unit, and it has armor penetration on it. Armor penetration is a little too much for me to get into the extent of a cast, especially for the target audience of this, but it will be effective against probably anything that the Northern team has at this time. He will not be sending it out right away. The Hydras have 2 armor, which will be defeated by the Barghest, but like you said, he's going to be relying on Shambler for detection through the form of the End Seal. So I'm not really expecting that early air to be super aggressive, and it's quite possible Keyan is not really expecting it to be super effective at this stage. So he's kind of just hanging on to them, perhaps waiting to get a mixed army. And that's sort of the impression I get from him, is that he's not willing to go right in all at once. He would kind of wait for a little bit of a mixed army and be more confident about his initial attack. So Shambler is going to move out with the Ant Sail and some infantry here, looking to put some pressure on Beaver since he took that early expansion. At this stage, Keyan is moving north and is looking to do something, perhaps looking to squash an expansion. There's no focused efforts, no double player activity here, so this doesn't really have too much kill threat, but maybe looking to zone out an expansion. You see, he sees that Circuit colony here and kind of just pulls back and starts poking it. There is detection here, and before he's able to respond, perhaps his attention was elsewhere, the Hydralisks easily dispersed one of those and managed to save the Circuit colony on top of it. So the first aggression, not very effective. Shambler here is probably going to meet similar difficulties in the form of this bunker, which does have SCVs to repair it. He is going to move in, but his Marines were not attacking initially. It was a massacre. It was a massacre. They moved in and they were not attacking right away. So, not sure what happened there. Men just paused. He was also confused. And a little bit of a disaster. So, Pr0nogo moving down here to try to capitalize on the failed offensive with his Hydras and detection, and is able to kill both the Barghests. But these Dractins are going to easily able to mop up the little bit of remains. If he's not careful, he could lose the Obelith, which would be an expensive loss. Keyan is trying to punish this as much as possible, but since Pr0nogo did go for a much more aggressive early opening with the Larvosk in addition to the Hatrosk, a lot more Hydras can come out. He doesn't really want to chase that too much. He has a Vagrant, which I've never seen before. I have no idea what they do, so this will be kind of interesting. I always thought those were a Terran unit. I think I saw them in one game, but I thought they were a Terran unit. So it's fairly fast attack rate. The Drakten tanking for him. And although the Drakten dies, kind of mean a little bit of a stalemate here. Both the players kind of sitting back to take a breather and reconsider their plans. I think at this stage, Pr0nogo is going to have to think about taking an expansion. Because if he's not able to break Keyan's defenses here, he's going to be at a serious disadvantage because of this expansion that's slowly coming online. In about 5 minutes, it's going to be a very, very, very bad spot for Pr0nogo to be in, sitting at an economic disadvantage while being unable to punish Keyan for his failed early attack. Keyan is going to have a Matrix up at some point, and this is looking to be quite durable, especially since Shambler is not really in a stage to help that. If he wants to help, he's going to have to send his Mavericks all the way across the map, and they're not going to do too well against the Matrix in Co either. Meanwhile, Beaver is also massing Mavericks. To be honest, I haven't seen too much bioplay out of Terran at all in this project yet. So it's quite different to see both players going bio, especially with the longer map distances. I would have expected to see more investment into the star pad or perhaps vultures for more mines, but it is a more open map, so the mines may not be as really effective. It's harder to find good spots to mine unless you want to section off these expansions. So it's very possible that's one of the reasons why they decide to stick to bio. However, Beaver does have a Fulcrum up, which we're going to see the Goliaths here. Still looking to be just defensive, though. Pr0nogo, however, is more of an offensive player and is going to be looking to probe here. I think it's more surprising to me to see TheShambler play so reserved. Perhaps due to the fact he's playing his Terran. So these Hydras here are kind of a little sectioned off. It didn't really get to fully complete his drop. And he's going to get a couple kills in here, but there was some assistance from Shambler. There was a plane to lend emotional assistance, and units are traded, but it wasn't really terrifically effective. Keyan is probably going to think about building more units, however, or perhaps more Wardens here, because it's quite obvious Pr0nogo really wanted to commit to attacking. Pr0nogo does have a second base up now and might be thinking of starting to either bank more gas and think about tier 2, or I guess he might be thinking of just committing exclusively to Hydras at this point. Beaver actually scouts him there. Those Hydras were rallied or on move command to go there, so the SEV would have spotted. The more reinforcements are heading on the way to Keyan, and Keyan is paying attention. He's going to know that more aggression is indeed going to be coming. We can see the second gateway, and looking to be a little concerned about error because of the plane that came in. He knows that Shambler at least has one air attacker and doesn't want to get backdoored. However, since his forces are in his base, the Hydras can just kind of walk in and kill the static defenses, and his production hasn't come online fast enough to make a difference in terms of his standing defenders. Those Hydras are just going to try to ignore the defenders because they are delaying and kill some probes. There is a lot of Mavericks over here. The Hydras are going to get pincered. Try to trade some kills at the least. Make them worth their cost. It's certainly annoying for Keyan to lose the defenses on top of everything, but it was not really a substantial blow. I think it will be more telling of how the game pace is going to go is if Pr0nogo is just going to keep trying to pressure Keyan at this point. And it seems like Keyan tends to, given that he's just going to continue pumping Hydras and not go for tier 2. He's not even capping the Geyser in his base, although he did cap the expansion Geyser. Shambler is certainly going more for a slower tech, turtling up behind all his bunkers, still producing Mavericks, and now taking a second expansion. The Atlas for tier 2 is now coming down. On Beaver's sides of the defense, he's still committing very heavily to Mavericks, and now with some Shamans on top of it for healing, and no sign of tier 2 on the way for him at all. He just has a huge mass of infantry. If he doesn't commit to this attack quite soon, he could find himself in a really nasty spot, because if Shambler decides to get Madrigals or tanks or some such, the infantry are going to be in a really bad spot. And he seems to sense this, so the gigantic wall of infantry is heading out, while Keyan is sending a spattering of Dractans and Vagrants over here to cut off this expansion. This two-pronged attack comes at the same time that Pr0nogo decides it's time to push my offensive, and he heads down with all of his Hydras, completely ignoring the attack that's about to hit his expansion. This is a very strange spot to be in. I did hear something explode. I'm not entirely sure what it was. They missed the expansion, though. They completely missed this expansion. I don't think he even knows it exists. He was heading towards the back. That's the more obvious route. There's a ping that goes off there. Meanwhile, Beaver is going to hit Pr0nogo's defenses. Pr0nogo's attack is advancing forward. He scouted the back as well. Nothing there. Both of them were looking for expansions to pick off. As the infantry get melted by bunkers over here, which also have healing, Pr0nogo's main gets absolutely flanked by these people who just walked up this ramp and started destroying it. Did burrow some of his shit, but the attack from Beaver ends up being repulsed. Pr0nogo is going to lose a Hatrosk and some mining time before squashing these forces. And really the bigger thing probably is that he had to pull back his attack. Right, not only did he take damage, he had to pull back his attack, and that attack had absolutely lethal threat on Keyan. If that attack had hit Keyan's base, it probably would have just instantly killed him. But he had to pull back when he saw that attack force. And that really delays him. So now he's going to send it back down. Keyan is now aware of the fact he has all those units. And although he lost his attack force, he is going to be, in all likelihood, preparing for it. Still more cannons coming here. They're really terrified of getting backdoored, especially since it's just backdoored himself. Another Wraith, just scouting, just looking around. Keyan was well aware of it because he saw it. That's why he started building cannons back there to begin with, I'm sure. But Beaver didn't really... You put one watchdog there, but otherwise not really paying too much respect to the possibility of being backdoored by air units. So trying to stand and fight here. Pr0nogo did send down pretty much everything he had, but he did lose some in that defense, and yeah, no longer quite as dangerous now that Keyan's been able to adequately more prepare. So Beaver, on the other hand, has not pulled back. He is just chilling out here outside of Shambler's base, pitching a tent well outside the range of those bunkers. So the captaincies are going to be producing apostles. They are the units that have the revive ability. And I haven't seen them too much either, but yeah, they're quite strong. 90 health, 2 armor pen, 12 damage. Not super high range or attack speed, but for sustained battles, which is what they're looking at right now, certainly can be quite effective. Those Hydras were engaged by Keyan. He murdered them all. I'm very curious what's going to happen over here. I have a feeling Beaver is in for a very rude awakening. Still got some defenses over here, just in case Keyan has more problems with Pr0nogo than expected. Pr0nogo now allowed to expand. Not only was this expansion spared the back door, which may have actually been worse for Pr0nogo than the damage he suffered in his main base, because it would have been a lot harder for him to counter it. It just continues to mine unabated. Tier 2 is now out for Pr0nogo. And we're still seeing the same units out of Keyan, but he's invested very heavily into the rogue galleries. Lots of vagrants coming out. Got a little bit of money in the bank, though. Could invest into some more. Beaver, on the other hand, is really hurting on gas. He's also expanding a lot. But these expansions are very, very vulnerable. If perhaps Shambler wanted to create a couple more Wraiths, he could pick off a lot of kills. And given the landlocked army, he'd have a really, really hard time dealing with that, actually. Some air harass on either side right now could be a real pain. Pr0nogo has no anti-air defense in any of these expansions whatsoever. Those Barghest could cause him a real hassle, causing him to try to chase him around the map with his Hydras. It would be vain and force him to build anti-air defenses at the very least, costing him time and money. But although he has still the tech to build those, he kind of gave up on Burgess, it looks like. Beaver is still reinforcing his tent. It's not got kind of like a circus parade out here now, just a little army of flesh. Pr0nogo is going to be scouting around here, checking the mid to see if they took it or not. Just going to notice there's all kinds of things here. May have spotted that salamander, a tier 2 air unit. There's some bactylisks here. These have exceptional range and damage, and are going to be a little bit of a pain in the ass with those apostles buffing them. Oh, the vagrants are just going to melt. Oh, it's a disaster. The spinning dicks. Pulls back to his defenses, but this is an army you have to get into and engage. Just constantly reviving over and over and over again. The damage he lays down just isn't enough. He's outnumbered. Those Terran units didn't move into his system either. There are some Bargists. A little late, mind you. There's a plane over here and more drones. Although many of the Hydras have died, the Bactylists, the ones that are the most threatening, are still quite alive. Beaver is attacking at this stage. The Salamander has caused a little bit of a headache, but it looks like it was just the one that died. Two of the bunkers are still alive. A lot of the damage is going on to the infantry, who are just reviving. It's just a massacre. Those Bactylisks are just going to shred through Keyan's base. There's pretty much nothing he can do at this point. Beaver needs to offer some assistance, but I think the Bactylists are just going to destroy his Salamanders. There's too many of them. And his AoE is kind of getting separated on the individual units. Keyan gives up, the Terran reinforcements are defeated, and Shambler at long last initiates his early aggression. The Hydra is just constantly reviving. No defenses on this side, since that was Keyan's side. Just trying to build all kinds of shit, but that's gonna be it. Oh! Oh! I don't think Pr0nogo notices it. No, now he does. He's trying to splash the ghost of the Salamanders. I don't know if he was trying to splash the ghost of the Salamanders or... Did they do? Nope, their ally is safe. They were just walking up to them. Almost killed them on top of it, too. Got some Heracles here. Quite high damage on those with very high armor penetration. With the apostles on behind those, I can't see Beaver even beginning to slow this down. At this point, Pr0nogo is just killing Keyan's dead base. There's only a couple of Salamanders here. They are just gonna melt, and that's that. Coming out of that game, I feel like the Southern team had the tools to really, really heavily punish Pr0nogo. He had this early aggression that was not really terrifically effectual, and Keyan had all those Bargists that if he had just sent a single one just straight up that side and noticed that back base, would have been able to at least, again, force Pr0nogo to go back on the defensive. And as the saying always goes, if you can't make an advantage in one part of the map, you need to make an advantage in some other part of the map. Instead, Pr0nogo was allowed to build like 3 bases, which as far as I saw had no anti-air defense whatsoever, when he had a group of air units that could have caused some really serious damage. And again, forced Pr0nogo to at least spend time building anti-air defense to stop them from harassing him, while probably getting in a number of kills on the workers and probably killing some of the Hatchwasks along the way. And but he, for some reason, he was buck broken at that point. He didn't really want to do that. And Pr0nogo never really was quite aware just of how much danger those bases really were in. Because he just was building anti-surface defense. He had no idea that the Barghest might just fly in there. Even though he had encountered Barghest before, earlier in the match, they weren't actively trying to harass him. They were just being used as part of a standing army. When I feel like they would have been served better just having that squad of them flying around harassing workers. Shambler, on the other hand, was allowed to just kind of like turtle up. And although Beaver attacked him, when it became quite clear that the bunkers were going to be an issue for his bio army, I feel like he should have taken tier 2 and just switched right into tanks and magicals. Or at least tanks, right? Like having something to deal with the bunkers other than throwing hordes of infantry at it. Because then you were dealing not only with the bunkers, but then the hordes of infantry and the apostles, and you had nothing to really provide the overwhelming firepower needed to kill the apostles and the reviving units. It was just Marines and some Goliaths and some healing versus other Marines repairing and then reviving, and then some repairing and healing on top of it. So it was kind of a losing fight altogether, and I feel like he might have been able to take advantage to do a tech switch. But, yeah, it would have been more difficult, especially with the left side going down. So in terms of resources, you can see that Keyan really suffered a lot on the resources. Gas not doing too well, and the minerals being rather unfortunate. Beaver was quite competitive on resources, but Pr0nogo was at the absolute top, even though early on into the game, he looked the most weakest economically, with his first expansion coming down rather late and investing quite a lot into Hydras. But he was catching up by taking over all those other bases and then having that back base remain untouched. Even though he lost his main Hatrosk and all the workers on top of it, having to either burrow or die, in other words, not mining for a period, he still ended up coming out on top in terms of gas mined and just about on top of minerals mined, with only Beaver having those bases on the right side of the map also untouched for a long period of time. Just able to mine forever. In both sides, I feel like that they had access to the units necessary to harass each other's worker lines. There were so many expansions just left undiscovered and unmolested that just a couple of Wraiths, a couple of Barghests could have made an absolute headache for. When I first paused this and opened and looked at the map, I thought these expansions are going to lead to a very fast, early, low economy game because the expansions looked so risky to take. At the end of the day, we ended the match. A lot of people took those expansions that were risky, and they took them in the riskiest way possible. Low defense, the armies were landlocked for the most part, they would have a hard time navigating to deal with harass from Wraiths and other air units that are infamous at ending these 2 versus 2s very early. And people didn't really respect that. And at the same time, they were allowed to get away with not respecting that. The individuals with those units, they didn't really take advantage of them just to even at least scout and see if there was an opportunity to be made there. Whenever there's those lulls in activity, people are going to be looking to take expansions. People want to hit that tier 2 power spike. People want to be able to all in with all Hydras like Pr0nogo is doing. People want to be able to commit to that. And if there's a period, this lull in period, where especially after you attack or there's a battle or something like that, where you're not seeing someone actively moving forces around the map, trying to either position themselves to take an objective or to punish you or to try to, thwart your attempt to punish them, for example, always assume that somebody's dealing with the macro elements. Always assume that somebody's looking to take expansions. And those side expansions are really off the beaten path. A lot of people are also going to be recognizing, hey, there's wide ramps and they're very open, they look really risky, but that means my opponent's going to think I'm not going to take them because they're too risky to take. So I'll just take them and they'll probably never scout them because they would assume that I wouldn't want to take it because it's risky. You enter all those sorts of little reverse mind games, and at the end of the day, we had both sides of the map populated by expansions that never saw any action whatsoever. So there's little bits and pieces of that, right? And I saw those Barghests. I thought we were going to see some of the nice early cheese, but it didn't actually happen. It didn't happen. So it's kind of an interesting 2 versus 2. And when we hit those tier 2 power spikes, it really shows like how are you going to adapt to those tier 2 power spikes, because like when the apostles come out, that was massively game changing, but the basilisks were also enormously game changing too, right? Like there was a spam of vagrants who were going to be completely outranged and outgunned by that horde of them regardless of the apostles. Even if Keyan didn't die at that point, he was most certainly going to lose that expansion and start getting camped by them. And he would have been really relying on his ally to help him thwart that out, just a one player, 2 versus 1. Even if Shambler never interacted with that engagement at all, the fact that the backtalists came when they did, in spite of the fact that Pr0nogo was able to, match his army early on and continually put pressure on him, for him to also be able to get the tech advantage on top of it because the expansions were left unchecked for so long, that shift alone results in this massive shift for the whole map. Because once you hit tier 2 and once you can start producing the more expensive units, if you're able to sit on that economy for a while, there's a big gap that grows between you and anyone else who hasn't caught up at that point. At that point, you hit the power spike in units where your economy goes from spamming hydras that can be kind of controlled with the tier 1 stuff into the tier 2 units with the better engagement and siege options, which become much more difficult to deal with if you don't have similar options yourself. At that stage, you have to be looking for ways to put advantages elsewhere on the map by forcing those units to constantly be running around and dealing with other problems than putting that power into your base and making your already difficult economic situation even worse. But I feel like in a lot of these cases, a lot of the games that don't end in cheese end in a similar way to this, where you hit that tier 2 power spike and there isn't enough of an opposing power spike against it, and it just results in a flip of a switch. And then someone just got absolutely fucking curb stomped, which is precisely what happened here.